I don't know. Do you? Let me see. All right. So this is a remote meeting we have set up per the executive order from the governor, kind of allowing kind of a revised public meeting process due to the COVID-19 issues. We'd open up the meeting. Normally we start with the Pledge of Allegiance, but we don't all have a flag to point to pledge. I defer to the other board members if you'd like to just do the Pledge of Allegiance or just begin with the agenda in this circumstance. What do you think, Greg?
I think we should still do the pledge. I think people like it.
I don't disagree. I just wanted to double check and not just, didn't want to arbitrarily decide. All right, let's begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag
of the United States of America,
and to the republic
for which it stands,
one nation, under God, indivisible,
with liberty and justice for all.
Wasn't quite sure how we had synchronized or not with the delay and all of this internet
Close
stuff.
enough.
Exactly. All right, so we'll get started. What we're doing right now is we'll open it up to anybody that may have public comment. Right now, if I recall, Claire and Sharon are primarily the only ones that could fit public comment, and I think even that might be more specific to Claire, that's attending the meeting remotely. Claire, do you have anything regarding public comment you would like to bring up?
Not at this time.
Okay. We'll move on to the next item then. Next item is a National Grid poll petition. I have reviewed this, so what I would like is, Heather, did you want to do any screen sharing of the document for the general public to see the petition itself?
Sure, I can do that. Just give me one moment.
Okay.
Maybe you give a brief description while she's searching for that so people know what's going on.
The pole petition is it's a combination of a new pole and underground conduit. It's primarily, is it just west of the intersection of Ruggles Lane and Bentley Road would be the first new pole, and then I believe they're going underground conduit feeding down to Grandview Terrace.
Yep.
And replacing some of the transformers and the conduit and cables feeding Grandview Terrace. I believe it's primarily an upgrade for Grandview Terrace, but it does affect how they're feeding it. I think the underground is an intent to reduce the potential for tree damage and other things like that over time. If I recall, our response from DPW was no issues with the plan other than the fact that they do not want the underground conduit laying on top of water lines, so that service of the water lines is impeded by the new conduit. Do you have any further comment, Greg, on that?
No, Jason has said he wants to make sure they don't start until we have those water and sewer lines labeled to ensure that. But yeah, that's the gist of it.
So Matt, we also have Jared here on this call with us from National Grid.
Okay. Jared, would you like to kind of present Ingrid's position on this?
No, you can't hear you.
It's amazing.
Sure. Can you?
Isn't it hot yet?
If you can hear me, I'll start with a kind of a brief history of what this project is about.
Sure.
Okay. So there is an existing underground service to the Barre elderly, the buildings at the end of the cul-de-sac. I believe that was installed sometime in the late 70s. It's direct buried cable, which is it's just cable laying in the bare ground. That typically has like a 25 to 30 year like lifespan before it starts breaking down. It was kind of the standard back in the day when they installed it. So the driving factor here is just the age of the existing cable. As far as the new pole goes, I believe there is an existing pole that goes from overhead to underground. That's where it transitions. And I believe there has been a couple motor vehicle incidents with that pole because it's at the end of like an intersection or at an intersection. So they want to relocate the transitioning from overhead underground to a mid-span pole. That's why we have a new pole. And from there, we're going to run parallel to the road and the sidewalk, keeping a minimum approach distance from the existing DPW water lines. So there is a clearance involved with that. As far as I know, the plans that I have, we are only crossing the road. I believe it's like just under 300 feet from the riser. So we do cross the road. I'm not exactly sure how that affects if there are any water lines at that where we do cross the road. That's on, I believe it's on the second page I gave you. It kind of just shows it's 285 feet from the proposed pole. We do cross the road. So there is that, but I believe that this will all be marked out, and we can coordinate that as far as staying away from any water lines that might be at that road crossing.
Can I ask, what's the purpose of crossing the road there? It seems like you loop all the way around the cul-de-sac in there.
So this is what we call a loop scheme. So if there's any problem, if you are, let's say you are at the end of the cul-de-sac and there is a problem, prior to that, we'll actually disconnect the service there and we're able to backfeed the other way. So that way, no one in the housing authority and the buildings will actually have an outage. So it's kind of like a redundant system. So if there's any type of fault between, point A and point B, we'll just feed them around the other way.
Heather, could you scroll down? I believe they have a layout that shows some green lines, or at least the green symbols for the switches or the fuse switches. And I think that's the point of the road crossing.
I understand the concept. You do the same thing with security systems and fire alarms. So as shorten the wire doesn't kill a fire system. I'm just wondering if that's the only thing I see that might give the town trouble with the water and sewer. So as long as that doesn't inhibit Jason, it shouldn't be a problem. Probably a low likelihood of a break in that new cable they lay underground any place in the loop. So I don't know how often that double feeded come into play. But
A couple more sheets down, Heather.
we just make sure Jason looks at that sheet and that's not going to interfere. Or if we got to have water sewer, I don't know if they're down the road or off the road there or where they are.
Gotcha. That's the one, Heather. Back one. Gotcha. So, I mean, I personally have no issue. I just want to make sure that National Grid is completely comfortable also with what Jason was requesting. The whole layout and making sure you keep your offsets. Nothing in this necessarily shows any notes regarding that, but I guess it kind of falls under general dig safe. But I don't know if we need any wording that technically in the contract or the request would state that conflicts with their underground conduit and access to our water system should be included in it so that it's just documented before the board signs off. What do the other selectmen think on that one? Do you think we're comfortable with just the verbal, we agree with it, or get it in writing?
Yeah, I'd like to see something. I mean, given what happened last time I dealt with National Grid and the pole for what was the road we were doing it on? Basically, we were assured that they passed everything through DPW, and DPW hadn't seen any of the plans yet.
Oh,
So I
going
just want to
back,
make sure we get it in writing.
was that Fruitland Street or something? Way out off of,
Yeah, after it crossed over Colebrook up there.
yeah.
But that went a little oddly, so I'd be more comfortable with it in writing that we just make sure they don't cross any water lines, go above any water sewer lines, and have that as part of it. Otherwise, Jason said he's okay with the plan. So I would have no objections.
Yeah, can't hurt to get it in writing.
Jared, how would you propose, we can write it in right on the application and sign it, or you can resubmit and we'll sign what you resubmit. I'm just curious how you would prefer to go about that.
I'd prefer to do both. Just so, I guess if you can write what you're requesting, and that way I can kind of submit that on my end and get a signature, and then it'll come back to you. So we kind of have like a two double.
Okay, so we'll write it in and sign it off, send it to you. That allows you to get started, and then you'll rewrite it, have it signed off and sent back to us in a more formal document.
Yeah, that works for us, and then that way I can attach any specifications of how far we will maintain from any like the exact dimensions that we'll try and maintain, or that we will maintain from any water infrastructure. Because I know there is like a minimum approach distance as far as we typically do not lay primary cable on top of water lines. So, but I know that we do have a spec that I would be able to kind of attach with that and give you a visual aid.
All right. So do we have a motion on this, or do we got further discussion?
I'm comfortable with it now.
All right. I'll make a motion to accept the poll petition based on the written revision we'll add into it regarding the separation or the minimum distance between their conduit and our water and sewer infrastructure on the road that our DPW superintendent will require.
Second the motion.
Call for a vote. Matt Urban, yes.
O'Sullivan, yes.
Clark, yes.
Thank you very much, Jared.
Thank you.
What did I do here? I lost how I minimize my screen and get back to the agenda I had open.
That's why I called it on this. I have my tablet with the agenda beside me. Cheating.
Found it. Exit full screen. Good. Okay. Do we want to jump to the Sharon Ashley items first? Do you think that's a good idea since she's online?
It's all right with me. I don't know if you're asking Heather or.
I should be better at that. Heather, do you recommend that we move on to Sharon Ashley's items?
Totally up to the board. Sharon is on and ready to go whenever you guys are ready for her.
Let's do it.
Let's go to Sharon and then we'll jump right to Ellen after that. So, Heather, could you remind me specifically which items we are looking for Sharon's input on?
Yeah, so there's no documents that we included for this one. But what we are talking about with regards to Sharon is the legislature had recently passed new legislation last week, and they had, I believe, passed it on Friday. It was what we had been waiting for. there were some pieces in it that had to do with financial aspects, and in particular, it had to do with the tax bills. So there were 3 provisions in it that were things that the board should consider and think about if they'd like to implement. One of them has to do with allowing municipalities through local option and a vote of their select board to postpone the due date of upcoming tax bills. One of them allows for municipalities, again through local option, through vote of their board of selectmen, to allow for the exemptions that come in through the assessor's office to be extended to a later date. And then the third one allows for the board of selectmen through local option and vote to allow for the forgiveness of any late fees and fines that come from paying bills, if they can be taken care of prior to June 30th relative to the tax bills. So those are the 3 options that are on the table. Sharon, Jean, and myself discussed last week. When everything got passed, Sharon and I discussed again today because we were looking at the legislation and the guidance from the Division of Local Services that came out. And we also discussed with Eileen, the town's assessor, to figure out as far as what impacts her. As far as the assessor's office goes, our understanding is all of the exemptions that they had expected in are in, so they don't feel like there's any need to extend those provisions at this time. The other 2 potential local options had to do with whether or not we extend the due date and whether or not we give the treasurer collector's office the ability to waive late fees and fines. And those 2 pieces are completely separate of each other. Sharon, did you want to jump into those 2?
Sure. So as Heather explained, we have option A, which would allow us to move the due date from May 4th to June 1. The other option, and we can adopt one or both, that'll be your call. The other option is the local option to waive interest and fees on excise, real estate, and all our utility bills. The due date for the option would be that we would waive all of the interest and fees until June 30, and then anything after June 30 would be obviously considered late, but that's the grace period till June 30.
Is your recommendation to, for the board to accept both? One, to move the deadline to June 1st, and then one to approve wiping the interest and late fees until June 30th?
Heather and I discussed this quite a bit today, and we decided that if we kept the due date as is, and so the thinking with that is that we felt that it would be the best way to encourage a continual revenue flow. The escrow companies we're hoping would still pay us the amount due on the due date, and that's our largest contributor, obviously, for real estate. So that's the thinking with keeping the due date as it is. For folks that can't pay, we still have the ability to wipe off their late fees as long as they pay before June 30. So that's something you and you, Greg, and Dylan can discuss and see what you feel more comfortable with. But our recommendation was only to accept the local option that wiped out the late fees and interest.
One quick question. If I'm reading item 3, the last sentence says the waiver of interest does not apply to bills with due dates before March 10th or if the bill is not paid by June 30th. So if they fail to pay by June 30th, do interest start accumulating as of June 30th or back to the original due date?
Back to the original due date.
Okay. So Greg,
So
what's your thoughts?
I had the same thoughts as they're saying. I think that hopefully most of our largest revenue source has to be property taxes coming in, and most of those probably come from financial institutions. So keeping the due dates where they are should keep most of our revenues coming in. The ones that are paid by persons, there's mostly the excise tax. That's what people are going to have trouble. I can promise you, self-employed people have no assistance yet from the government in any way, shape, or form. Massachusetts will only help self-employed when the federal government gives them direction on how they want them to do so. So where other states are paying, Massachusetts isn't. I don't know how other people are doing. I know my son, for example, was denied his unemployment. Don't know why yet. So I think there's going to be a lot of people having trouble getting this, even the money that's been released, keeping up in payments. So I think it's a good idea to waive the interest. Would hope by June 30th it's all straightened out and everyone should be caught up. And I think that's probably the most people would hope for right now anyways.
Yeah, Dylan, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I would agree with Greg that seems like a reasonable thing to ease some of the burden that people are finding themselves under now. So I think it's a good idea to explore.
Okay. I'm in general agreement with both of you. So let's see. So what we're looking at is a motion for the, let me see if I'll read this now and see if I get the motion right. You guys can tell me if you think I screwed it up. Make a motion that the town of Barre Board of Selectmen vote to waive interest and other penalties for late payment of any excise tax, betterment, assessment, or apportionment thereof, water rate or annual sewer use or other charge added to a tax for any payments with the due date on or after March 10th, 2020, where payment is made late but before June 30th, 2020. This applies to late payments of bills that have a due date of March 10, 2020 or after, when such bills are paid late but paid on or before June 30th. The waiver of interest does not apply to bills with due dates before March 10, 2020, or if the bill is not paid by June 30th.
Second the motion.
Call for a vote. Matt Urban, yes.
O'Sullivan, yes.
Mark, yes.
Thank you very much. So that's item 1 on the finances. Are we going to go through the budget update, or is that just for reference now, or does the board want to kind of review any budget update stuff first before we get to it? What are you presenting, Heather or Sharon?
I'm just happy to give just a brief update of what we know from discussions at our finance meeting, as well as information that we are waiting on updates from the state of Massachusetts. So as far as FY20 goes, one of the conversations that's come up in a number of conference calls, Division of Local Services last week with Sean Cronin, as well as the Lieutenant Governor, they were speaking or trying to answer the question that many municipalities had, and it's definitely one that's come up internally for us, is are we going to potentially expect 9C cuts? 9C cuts, for those at home, are the cuts that happen from the state government, usually due to state revenues, not coming into the projections they anticipated mid-year of a fiscal year, meaning something that would hit through FY20 and reduce the amount of funds we get. One of the things they're going to be facing is a reduction in the amount of revenues they're going to be pulling in for things like gambling, since the casinos are all closed, as well as potentially a reduction in their marijuana sales, because right now it's only, my understanding is it's only medical, it's not retail as well. So they're going to have less numbers on those sides. As far as the town-wide goes, I mean, obviously we're not going to have definitive numbers until things start coming in. Every quarter, I think we figured that we generally bring in about $1 million in real estate from escrow accounts, and approximately around 400,000 that are from folks who don't have the funds taken by escrow. That could be people who already own their house out in full and they don't have a mortgage, or folks who, for one reason or the other, the escrow didn't become part of, or it wasn't, the taxes weren't taken as part of the escrow when they did their mortgage. But even if you look at that number, you're looking at 400 a quarter. Let's assume that, 50% of people own their houses, they're all set. That drops it down to 200,000. So you're looking at potential some fraction of that may not come in. We don't anticipate necessarily a huge hit for FY20, but as far as the revenues go, FY21 could be impacted. We've had conversations with the veterans agent. We're getting an increased number of applications come in because folks are losing their jobs. And when that's happening, they're now relying on more assistance. And that's fine. We get reimbursed. I believe it's like 75%, but it's not for a year and a half away, which means our expenses are going to increase. So it's something we're going to have to very closely monitor and keep an eye as to what's coming in with revenues and where we are with our current projection numbers to see if we have any anticipated areas with potential shortfalls or things that we have to address as the next couple months happen. As far as FY21 goes for next year's budget, at this point, they're meeting again this week, A and F, as well as the Ways and Means committees for the House and the Senate. And they're supposed to provide guidance out to the municipalities after they do so of what they're looking at for next year. Again, we anticipate that there's going to be a reduction in their state aid, which is going to impact us both in our unrestricted aid, as well as likely somehow have an impact on the school end of things and Chapter 70 funding, perhaps. As far as our revenues go, again, we anticipate that that's where we would likely see more of an impact relative to some of those non-escrow real estate accounts for the next fiscal, as well as potentially excise tax and water and sewer and other things that if folks don't have funds to feed their families, they're not going to have funds to pay the taxes. We also anticipate there's a likelihood of decreased number of building permits moving forward because folks who are out of work may not be applying for a building permit to do new construction on their homes. So that's where we are currently. Other than that, we're in good shape. We got a full funding back of, I think it's to the tune of $53,000, give or take, for the MEMA grant that we had applied for last year for the DPW's generator. So we got word that money was released in full, and we should have that at any time. We also are in the process. We had got an initial $3,200 from Department of Public Health released to the regional planning agencies who were distributing the funds to the local boards of health. That was about a week or so ago. And then we just got word this morning that we also got an additional $3,500 for public health nursing to split with New Braintree. So we'll continue utilizing those funds to help out. Jean, our town accountant, and Sharon have worked together to create some separate account numbers. I think I mentioned this last week. To be able to keep track of our expenses that are related to COVID-19. And we have received a memo from MEMA and some guidance of what expenses are covered, as well as that it will be a 75-25 split. So that's where we are with finances as of right now. This morning, I actually walked through with Claire, got her trained a little bit on Zoom, getting her a bit familiar. And we'll continue doing that with some of the finance officials so that hopefully in the next week or so we can do a finance committee meeting on Zoom and everyone will feel comfortable.
Okay. Greg, do you have anything you want to say on that?
Nope. I expected we'd have some shortfalls from taxes, but there's still a guess, and I don't think it'd be as bad as it could be. I thought it could be as much as 400,000 to 600,000 throughout this, and hopefully it's not that bad. It doesn't sound like it will be. It's just wait and see. If we no way to pre-plan it.
Dylan, you got anything?
No, not exactly, but thank you, Heather, for the update.
I think it looks like our bigger hit might be the state side, but we have no way of knowing where they're going to go with it. for next year, you know?
Heather, do you have an idea about what time we'll know if the FY20 funding gets adjusted from the state?
My understanding from last week was that A&F and Ways and Means, I want to say they were supposed to meet on Wednesday. There's a series of conference calls that one of our town officials always sit in throughout the week. I want to say the one we'll likely get an update on is probably on Thursday. So as soon as we get information, we'll push it out to folks, specifically the board. I just don't know yet or what day they're planning to do it. Last week they had mentioned something about Wednesdays.
Okay. One of the reasons I asked is a couple meetings ago, I brought up the free cash amount that was higher than anticipated for last fiscal year.
Mm-hmm.
Almost double what we had kind of, I don't know if the right word is budgeted, but what we were planning the FY20 budget. And I don't know if that's something, once we get those numbers, we want to start looking at rather than putting into another capital item, if without affecting our original budget of it, but with the additional free cash we didn't expect or didn't plan on, we might plan on using that to help fill in the gap of FY20, or even if we foresee FY21. So that would be something maybe to just bring to, I mean, Claire's on here, so she's listening. Maybe the finance committee can keep that in mind as the information becomes available to see if that's something that's the right move now to prevent us from digging a hole. But I'm just putting it out there, not necessarily asking for anybody to do anything about it now, but I do understand that we had almost doubled what we expected in free cash, and maybe that could help us if we have significant shortfalls this year. It might be a way to help us get through it without digging a hole going into the next year. Greg?
I had the same thoughts, Matt, on the free cash. We're fortunate to have that coming. I'd rather see us hopefully restrict spending as we have, and that will, I'm hoping, take up most of the gap. And I certainly think we're going to need free cash to shore up our budget at the end of the year to make sure that we got to keep our heads above water. We don't want to go negative. We don't want to dig into stabilization. And hopefully, next year's budget, we can just keep it reasonable. And it's going to hurt, but we're going to have to do something to try to stay within the expected revenues. I think the things that we fall short on this year, like taxes, we will get those, albeit late, but I think they will come back and maybe bolster free cash again next year. And once again, it's the state side. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know how much you're going to pull back. And that can, significantly impact the budget. And that's what I'm worried about. And if we had to, whatever we do have left, we can keep it as free cash for next year, a good portion. And we could certainly bolster stabilization and just, realize we may need it next year. Hopefully we don't need to get too heavy into it this year.
I agree. Dylan, you got any more to say on that?
Nope.
Okay. Thank you for the update, Heather.
I think Sharon might have one more thing, Matt.
Go ahead, Sharon.
Oh, Heather just encouraged me to let everybody know that we will be mailing out. Each taxpayer is going to get a letter just stating that we will be waiving all fees until June 30. That's part of the stipulation with accepting the options.
Okay.
I think it should clarify, as Matt asked, that in that letter, it's clear to people that if they don't pay by the 30th, the interest will be past due.
Correct.
Make sure
I do think that's
understand
important. Yeah, and also it goes back to the due date. That could be quite hefty.
Yeah, I think a lot of people wouldn't necessarily automatically understand that unless you try to really spell it out for them. So if you could, I'd appreciate that also, Sharon.
Sure, will do.
do we have more on the finance committee stuff today?
I don't have anything, but Claire, did you have anything from finance
You know,
committee?
we're just hoping to get a Zoom meeting up so we can get all caught up on stuff. So everyone will know what's going on.
But I have been keeping Claire apprised week to week as we update on finance stuff and any information we have. And Claire's been making sure she keeps her committee apprised as well to know what's going on.
Yep, I've been doing that.
Thank you very much. It's not as easy to do these days. All right, so let's work our way back up, getting back to COVID-19 and town elections stuff. So I believe we originally thought about setting certain dates for a revised election date, but then I thought I had heard Ellen may have a different suggestion. So what I would like to do is, if you're available, Ellen, give you the floor. You're still here. No. Well, I'll give you the floor, Heather.
I
and
think
maybe you can-
I think Ellen might be here on the phone. Ellen, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Then you have the floor, Ellen. What is your thoughts on the election date?
I was thinking of holding off a little bit longer before we actually set the date. We still have plenty of time to do that. That will give us more time to get a little more organized and figure out how we're going to move forward with absentee ballots and early voting ballots and getting notices out to the public. Some of the things that I'd like to go over with town council also, just checking on, would be changing the hours the polls are physically open, because if we're going to advertise and push heavily for the early voting and the absentee voting, that will significantly reduce the amount of people that actually show up at the polls. And also just going over some of the other logistics like we had talked about last time, like possibly reducing to one polling location, if that works. Kind of looking at some of the past numbers and seeing what other options. I know that if we decide to reduce the polling hours, and if we also decide to consolidate the polling locations, it's going to require a mailing that go out to each household, notifying them of the changes. And which would be a good opportunity to really advertise the early voting and the absentee voting as well by sending a postcard to every household, letting them know. But I think this is something that I needs a little more thought. So I think we should hold off maybe till the next meeting. And then I'm thinking maybe holding, setting the date maybe later than originally thought and going towards, we have until June 30th to set the date. So June 30th is actually a Tuesday. We could actually set the new date for June 30th. And that would give us the most possible time to get everybody voting by mail. I don't know what the board's thoughts are, but those were some of my thoughts.
Greg, you got thoughts on that?
Yeah, I talked about this with Ellen briefly, and my concerns, if we're going to close a polling place and reduce the hours, we're just going to increase the density of people there in those times. We're optimistic that letting people, do absentee voting is going to reduce the numbers at the poll. But I think if we consolidate, if anybody has the concern still, if we're still dealing with COVID when we have to do this, that reducing the hours and reducing it to one location is going to cause people more concern again, and that may keep people from the polls. So I would rather keep both stations open and the hours full. It helps spread people out, and you add on top of that people can, do their early voting or absentee voting. I'm sorry. It should really spread it out and minimize the number of people in there at one time. You can still do a mailing for that if you wanted to push the absentee voting. But we can certainly put the signboards out in town and publicize it so people know. As far as the date, obviously, we want it done before town meeting. We still plan to have town meeting, I assume, by the end of June. So we ought to just think backwards. If we do this, a week before town meeting, when do we need to start by, just to get an idea of our deadline?
We need to, we think we have 20 days minimum is the minimum.
So if we advertise for June 1st and did it by the 20th or the closest to that day it works out, we'd say we need to come to a decision by the end of May anyways.
That would be the minimum amount, yes. But again, if we're going to change, if they do decide to change the hours or the polling locations, either of those, then it would require reposting, updating the warrant with the posting, and require mailing for all households. So we need time to put that mailing together and get it out.
I don't want to do those things.
Now, the reverse 911 call in addition to that.
Yeah, I kind of agree with Greg on that. I think I kind of like the idea of maintaining the two locations in the regular hours. At least that means we're just making sure everybody knows of the revised date, and we're trying to get the information out for the absentee vote / early vote ballots to people that might want to take advantage of that. And if you think, thankfully we're still in early April, but Ellen, if you think you may be reaching a point where having enough election commissioners may be part of the reason why you were consolidating to one location, is it possible if we need to, we can advertise and try to get more people in, trained, and able to fulfill a position, assuming we may have that need at that time?
Yeah, consolidating the polls was one of my concerns, was it would be less election workers that we would need to actually run the polls, and having the workers there for the whole duration of the day, and trying to limit the hours on that. And then also, we really don't need to have, there's nothing that requires that we have the election before town meeting also, just to clarify that. And we could also do some of the mailings with Sharon. If Sharon sends out a mailing, we could work with a mailing with her mailing as well for the tax late fee. If that's going out to all households anyways, we can get all the notices all together in one notice. But if we're going to do that, then we would need to set the date sooner rather than later as to when we want to actually hold the election. My thought on reducing the hours also was it would limit the hours that the election workers were exposed to everybody coming in and out. Your voters are going to come in and they're going to leave. Typically for a town election, we don't have a very big turnout for, especially an election that doesn't have very many contests on the ballot. So I think even if they reduce the hours somewhat, it wouldn't really affect, I don't feel the crowding would be an issue, especially whereas early voting and absentee voting would be pushed or recommended, the recommended way of voting. But either way, whichever the board decides will make it work.
Do you think it's worth trying to get some people in and trained to be an election commission worker in the event that you may need additional people at that time? or even people that you might be able to rotate. So that way you could have someone in there for 4 hours and then rotate with another person for 4 hours to reduce the potential exposure time.
But then you're just exposing more people rather than less people, I think. But I mean, I'm all for getting new election workers. If there are people that are interested in working, absolutely, we could get them in. They need to be appointed by the Board of Selectmen. Once they get appointed, then we can start training them. But there's a lot of training that needs to be done before they can actually work the polls.
I would suggest that maybe we come up with paper filter masks, the inexpensive ones that everyone that enters the building wears. The risk for transmission is the mask isn't to protect you from getting it, is to protect someone else from expelling it. That's the main issue that the mask does. We can certainly get some better masks, I would assume, for the election workers, that they could wear a hospital grade mask or something to help them since they're there all day. But this is not an airborne virus. It's got to be through contact. Most of the election workers should have no contact with anything that the people touch. The ballots are handed to them. They're not touched again by an election worker. Like we said, I do have the Purell. I'll show you. I've got 6 bottles of Purell so we can make sure that people disinfect as they come in, and they're welcome to do so when they leave. So the risk of us, contaminating the pens or the paper are very low. If somebody's showing any signs, coughing, sneezing, we'd have to make an arrangement to have them go into a separate room or something to get their ballot and not to put them in the main room, to distance them intentionally. But I really don't see a great risk in whether we're there for 10 hours or 6 hours. We're going to have the same number of people go through, which is where the risk comes from, is the people. It's not like the room is suddenly infected, and being in it longer raises your level of risk. It requires you contacting the virus and then getting it into a mucous membrane, which is going to be your nose, your mouth, and your eyes. Restrain from touching your face, restrain from eating things with your hands without washing your hands. And it will really go a long way to minimize anyone's risk. So I think if we have masks on people as they come in, that's going to make our workers very safe. And I still like to move things as little as we can, because it does make it easier for the public to get back and do this by us just changing the date and not mixing everything up on them.
Okay. The other thought I have is traditionally, I know at least at the seniors center, the layout is everybody enters and exits the same door, so you get constant cross traffic coming in and out. And I didn't know if we could also potentially look at revising kind of the stations in the election cycle that kind of lead to someone coming in and leaving a different door. If we have either at the senior center and American Legion or other locations, that maybe we'd look for alternate locations that allow accessibility in 2 different doors so they can enter one and leave another, and prevent people from walking back and forth in front of each other also. Now, hopefully by the time this comes, it's really not the issue that it is now. And kind of like Greg said, if you just have masks and you're walking by each other with masks on, you're protecting the other people. So other people shouldn't be as worried about an individual walking by them with a mask, or in some degree, even the what the CDC recently said about your own cloth bandanas, things like it. It's all kind of better than nothing. The idea is not to be spreading it. You're trying to protect other people when you wear the mask, not necessarily, like Greg was saying, protect yourself. These are all things I'm just thinking we could consider, but I'm not necessarily saying we should.
Matt, for
yes.
an alternate polling location, it would have to be an election survey done on the location, and it would have to meet the state regulations for handicap accessibility under the election law. So that's something that would take a little bit more time, I think, to have to find a place that's suitable. That we just had both of our polling places locally reassessed, and a member of the Secretary of State's office came out and did the actual survey. So if you are thinking of trying to find an alternate location, that's something that would need to be done. And I think that the locations that we have will work fine. Even if we are using the same entrance, as long as, like at the senior center, they can exit through, like around by the elevator. I mean, they could still use the same door to go out, but we could filter everybody that's leaving to go out through the library around that side, to give a little bit more space. My concerns are trying to find another building too is the handicap accessibility, and making sure that we're compliant with that. Trying to think the other option at the senior center, they do have another door right behind where you deposit the ballot that goes out into the parking lot. But I think there's a cement slab there with a step down, if I'm not mistaken. I don't think it's completely flush ground level, which I don't know if we could, if that would pass for accessibility.
I don't think we'll have handicap accessible other than the entrances we use. But once again, I really want to stress for everyone, there's no risk walking by somebody. Unless they cough or sneeze and you're inhaling when they do so, there isn't a risk. The CDC still says, as long as someone's not showing actively sneezing and coughing, even if they've been confirmed to be exposed, keep your social distancing 6 feet or less for 20 minutes or less. So we're not talking passing by somebody. There really is no risk to walk past somebody, especially if you wear a mask. It shouldn't be a concern at all. The masks are to keep you from spreading it if you do have it. A lot of people are having the virus and not showing any symptoms and not having any problems from it. But they can give the virus to someone else that's susceptible, that has worse symptoms and is in poor medical health, and obviously can take a bad turn from the coronavirus. The airborne aspect just isn't there. If you sneeze and literally the particles of mist from your sneeze or cough are in the air and someone can breathe them in, that's the 6 foot idea. That mist will settle out and it'll go about 6 feet around. Outside of that, people are safe. So the 6 foot really only becomes an issue if someone coughs or sneezes. That sneeze or cough could land on surfaces. Now, those surfaces you could touch your face, and you can spread the disease. A part of the issue with kids is kids touch everything. Kids get into everything, and they don't wash their hands. Then they touch everything else. And that's an easy way that it's spread when people aren't keeping their kids at home and we're not practicing social distancing with children, that they tend to touch things. They may not touch their face and get it, but they can have it in their hands and spread it all over the place. So, keep your hands to yourself, wear your mask, we'll be just fine.
Okay. I've noticed I got a couple call-in attendees. What I'm going to do is I'm going to call out the last 4 digits of your number. And if you could give your name so we can update it so we know your name, I'd appreciate it. The last 4 digits is 2842. Somebody call in with the last 4 phone number digits of 2842. Oh, okay. Just wanted to make sure so I could more easily identify if you wanted to participate. All right. So I think right now, Ellen, I'm guessing you're suggesting that we still move this to the next meeting before we make a decision, but we had a good discussion on it, so we have a better idea of what to plan on. Is there anybody else that does have anything they'd like to say or discuss on this? For those on the computer, you probably at the bottom would have an icon that allows you to raise your hand. So if you hit that icon, I can actually see if you're interested in participating. All right, I believe we've discussed this pretty thoroughly this time. I think I would like to move on to the next item, the COVID-19 related matters and questions. I'll give the floor to Heather to start with, and we'll go from there.
Sure. Sorry, I was just helping, hang on one second, there we go, okay. I was working with cable access to make sure that they had a good view at home. So other COVID-19 updates, let me just pull up my agenda here so that I can follow along as well. Okay, what do we want to cover? Okay, Cold Brook Campground. We got a couple inquiries on this and a couple things had raised it to the emergency management team's attention. So I did send things out. I believe the select board has access to all of those documents, and I think we forwarded a few of them that came along. So there was some concerns about whether or not they would open. The Board of Health did contact them and let them know that under the governor's orders, they are a non-essential business, and therefore they're not opening anytime before May 4th at the absolute earliest. We did have one situation where there appeared to be maybe some miscommunication with change of management maybe at the Cold Brook Campground, where residents did come up. They were seasonal, and they had come from out of town, so they were there, but we were able to work out with communications to the Board of Health and the campground, and no longer is anyone there, and they've taken all the security measures that they were requested to take to make sure that they kept their premises so that no one was on them during this time. So it's Cold Brook Campground. Any questions on that?
There are A-frame houses there which people own. I would assume those people will be allowed to occupy their A-frame homes. They rent, I believe, land from Cold Brook, but they own houses, not actual campers. Other than that, I think an influx of 1,000 people to the campground into our town of 5,000 is unwise.
So
I think the people who own structures probably need to be given the right to get in their structures.
So I think this came up in the conversation, and I'm happy to follow up with the Board of Health on this one. I believe what they called those units were chalets. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, sure.
So, and I believe the reference was the same, that they're still considered seasonal and that the campground is still considered closed to them as well, because even though they own the structure, they don't own the land. That was the definition, and that was the explanation that was given by the Board of Health in our number of meetings that we had that this came up and during the conversations with them. So Greg, I can research it further, or I can have Phil, who's our Board of Health alternate agent, who's really the lead on this, contact you to clarify any of that, because I'm probably missing some of the terminology in between, but that's as I understand it.
My experience was years ago, I haven't had any dealings with Cold Brook in probably 6 years, 7 years. But there were people that lived there, I thought, year-round in some of those buildings, that's all. If that's not the case, then we shouldn't have an issue. But if that is the case, then, you know, clearly people, if they live there, they live there.
My recollection of seeing some of the documentation was that I believe that Cold Brook Campground fell under one of our town's bylaws relative to when the seasonal allowances were for people to come, because I think that was other interpretations as well, Greg, is previously, I think it was in year-round thing. And I think when the bylaw passed at some point in the past, they had changed it so that people could not occupy there any sooner than April 1st. And then I forget the cutoff date, because I believe there was correspondence that came through to the board on that this week or last week.
All right, we'll just have to follow up and make sure. Certainly, most of the people come in and bring their campers as seasonal. Some people leave their campers there. They're still seasonal. the campground operations, their swimming pool, their clubhouse, their golf course, their whatever else they do for functions. Obviously, those are all seasonal activities. But I'd just like to make sure we do clarify about those chalets, because years ago, I know people did live there year round. Maybe they don't anymore, but I know when you own it, you lease the land. I'm pretty sure they have to lease the land year round as well. So, equivalent to a trailer park or something.
Okay, I can follow up on that.
That's. I just want to make sure if people live there that they're not getting kicked out of the house there.
Gotcha.
There shouldn't be any services by the campground. But
okay. So the other things I have on my list here, Memorial Day Parade. I did talk to Tony, our veterans agent, the other day. He still had some concerns about how they were going to put this together this year. As of the end of last week, I didn't have any additional updates, but I'll keep the board apprised. I know this is something that's very important to many veterans in town, and they're trying to see what they can organize to be able to be cognizant of the social distancing and keeping everyone safe, but yet still doing something on that day, because I know it's very important to many veterans. So I have no more updates on that at this time, but as soon as I get more information from Tony as it unfolds, I'll share away. Other things I have on the list here, let's see. Town cleanup day. I know there was some, Matt, I know you sent me an email, and a resident sent me one as well, to look at some of the other towns and what programs they're currently doing. And the town of Sturbridge is currently doing a cleanup day town-wide. I had a couple conversations with Jason last week. He was going to follow up and do some additional research so that we could figure out some of the potential concerns to see if there's a way we can do something with making sure we address everything and see if it's something we can pull off. So I have not heard back from Jason as of today. Last I chatted with him was on Friday. So I'll continue to follow up with him this week and report back and see if there's something that the DPW feels that we can recommend to the select board to move forward and try to get people behind. Well, they might have some free time.
Appreciate that.
Okay. That's all I'm trying to see here if I have anything else. We did the recommendations. I think that's all for those pieces. As far as personnel matters, so the only thing that's really come up is the FFRCA, which I believe is the Federal Family Relief COVID-19 Act. And that's an amendment essentially and addendum to the FMLA that's already in place. There's a couple of provisions to it. It's federal law, so it's something that comes down that's implemented, that has to be implemented. And the municipalities, unlike quite a few laws, are not exempt from it. It applies. I'm trying to get some more information on it because there's lots of questions about whether there's provisions in it that are ones that we could do, that we should do, or that we shall do. There's actually a training, I believe, at the end of this week on Zoom that the Mass Managers Association, along with the Human Resource Association, are co-hosting with an attorney named Michelle Randazzo, who's pretty well known from KP Law, which is the large law firm in the state that quite a few municipalities and school organizations use. And she's teaming up with a woman named Lisa Adams, who's the MMA Mass Municipal Association's legislative analyst, to kind of break down the FFRCA and go over all the details of it and how it applies. I don't have any recommendations for the board at this time, but some towns have looked at exempting certain departments, including public safety, from the expansions of FMLA leave and still allowing for the paid sick leave. So there's lots of pieces in this that we need to dive into to figure out what the recommendation back to the board is. But for right now, the entire law applies to all of the municipal employees that it impacts. I believe one of the very big differences between it and FMLA is it actually applies to employees who've worked for the town for 30 days or more. As opposed to FMLA, it's more of the past, has to be a substantial number of hours over the past year. And there's a certain number, I think it's like 1250. So those are pieces that we need to keep an eye on and see how it unfolds and see what other communities are doing as far as policies and have a conversation about what makes the most sense for our employees. Other than that, the only other personnel stuff that comes up relative to COVID-19 is just looking at what other municipalities are currently putting into place relative to some of their workforces who are currently still operating as usual. I know right now we're doing well with our police department, and we have, I believe we've set it up so it's 2 12-hour shifts so that we can keep folks' exposure to other people pretty limited. We do thorough cleanings in between. Most of our municipal office employees at Henry Woods Building are either working remotely or working a hybrid of remotely and in the office, but generally solo, so there's no one else in the office. I think the only exception to that right now is currently the clerk's office where they're trying to get the election stuff done, but they're still trying not to go in at the same time. The fire department, I think they're doing the best they can, but keeping in mind that regardless, you can only get so far away from someone else when you're in an ambulance with them. And then there's the DPW. I haven't had an opportunity to talk in depth with Jason about what they're currently doing at the DPW. But what I do know is other communities are starting to look at staggering people's shifts or making sure that there's no more than one person per vehicle, providing folks with masks if they feel comfortable doing that so that they can protect themselves and protect others around them. I know I drove by down through the town of Westminster today, and where they had DPWs on site, they actually had folks pretty well spaced apart, and a couple of them had face masks on. So I'm not sure what current provisions we're currently taking with the DPW, if that's a concern. And then before I go to one other thing, is there any thoughts or feedbacks or recommendation from the board on the personnel side?
Just double check when you go through that FFRCA review that later this week, the financial implications, because my understanding is when FFRCA does apply, one, it has to be substantiated it was a COVID-19, not just standard FMLA. And second, that I thought if it did fit that, it fit into, I thought 100% reimbursable from the federal government. So that was one of the things, if you could confirm that, it would be appreciated.
Okay. On it.
And depending on, because I don't know right now, I haven't reached out to Jason or any of the DPW commission, but I'm not 100% sure whether we're planning on meeting next week or not. How DPW is or isn't addressing COVID and potential social distancing within the work environment. I mean, it probably might be very similar to like the police department. In other words, if there's two people in a truck, they're the team. They're paired up and they stick to a team. But maybe we could just reach out to Jason and just ask him to just try to pay attention to those things and not have to bring it to the DPW commission and just kind of go with it that way, use his best judgment. I think we all know Jason's not looking to get anybody, sick with what he's doing, but he is trying to make sure he gets the job done at the same time. But rarely is there more than two people in a truck ever. And I think most of the time when that is the case, it's because they're teamed up. They're kind of like a lead and a sidekick in a way, for that particular truck, because I don't think we have the equipment for everybody to have their own truck. So that's just my thought. Greg, what's your thoughts on that? Or do you have thoughts?
We can certainly reach out and ask through Shannon if we're going to have a meeting and maybe recommend a Zoom meeting. I think it'd be wise for us to just talk to them and see what's going on. Other than that, most of the DPW workers work or have worked for the fire department. We all had an 1.75-hour briefing yesterday. keep up with the CDC recommendations and what first responders are doing, updated our protocols for the fire department, for the ambulance, for hospitals around, what we're going to wear for gear, protective gear, and when. So the guys have the same information, they have the same knowledge. And, I'm sure Jason is, being reasonable with the social distancing. But we ought to try to reach out and see if we can have our meeting via Zoom next week and just touch base with everybody and see if there's anything they need from us too.
Okay. I'll send an email out to Shannon and Jason and just initiate the conversation.
Very good.
So the only other piece I have here, so the emergency management team, we met last week, and one of the questions that came up was we had a concern that was brought to our attention by a few residents that there were kids that were still grouping together and playing at some of the playgrounds. We talked about it quite extensively. We talked about what other communities are doing. Some communities are closing down all of their playgrounds and parks. Some communities are removing every other swing to try to provide some social distancing. And we got some feedback from Judy, who is our public health nurse, as well as Phil, who is our alternate public health agent. I'm just trying to pull up my notes here. So we had talked about a couple things that we would recommend to the Board of Selectmen for consideration relative to the playgrounds. We did not recommend closing all of the playgrounds. We had talked about it as to even what other communities were doing. And there's not a lot for kids sometimes, especially in certain areas of town, really for anything else to do. And we don't want kids to have the opportunity to focus on other things that take away from some of our public safety. And what we had talked about instead was looking at saying that a recommendation to the board would be to have the basketball courts closed, but to have every other swing removed from, and the DPW said that they could do that so that it provide more distance. And that we would recommend that folks didn't group together more than groups of 10, make sure they adhered to the social gatherings, and also that people were paying attention to social distancing. So after meeting, that was our recommendation for the board to discuss.
Are you recommending any signage be posted about just asking people to limit gatherings and kind of pay attention to the social distancing, or just kind of what you said, just take down a few swings and kind of just try to maintain the, I'm just curious because I don't know if there's a concern with, nor do I even know if there's a potential of this. So I'm just throwing it out there as an example of what do we do if. But if 15 kids get together and go into a park and start all hanging out like they're not paying attention to social distancing, if we don't have a sign, does that prevent us from enforcing anything? In other words, if we put up a sign saying, don't gather and play basketball or play soccer together and all hang out and like tackle each other and as if this isn't going on, technically my understanding is everything is guidelines right now. So if you don't put up a sign, it's not like it's really enforceable. So I don't know, is that something that we should consider?
There were penalties in the governor's guidelines. Now, I don't know if those were strictly for businesses at state opening or for everybody. But there were penalties, I believe, that said the first violation would be a warning, second would be a $300 fine, and third would be $500 and possible imprisonment. So pretty serious, the penalties that were listed. But I don't know if that applied to businesses, shops that stayed open, or groups or whatever. I don't know how that was being applied.
I think the idea from the emergency management team was just to put up signs as reminders to folks. And then the police, I think, are already doing a good job of going by and saying, hey guys, let's break up the group a little bit. Let's, be mindful and so forth. If families feel that they want to bring their kids to the park and they want to sanitize everything ahead of time and afterwards, and that makes them feel comfortable, that's great. We were just concerned that if we leave the parks open without saying anything, we don't want people to assume that we're out there and we're sanitizing everything every 10 minutes to make sure that person A doesn't leave things for person B. It's kind of like a use at your own risk piece, but at least it's the options out there so that when the families and the kids run out of things to do and they need to get outside a little bit, that provides them the opportunity, at least by distancing the swings a little bit, kind of spaces people a little bit further away. And we put the signs up to remind people.
All right, that works for me. Dylan, did you have anything you wanted to add to that conversation?
No, I think the signage idea is, I think that's a good idea. Hopefully there aren't any problems going forward. The signage makes it more official. People can't use the excuse that they don't know any better. So I think that's a good thing to pursue.
Okay. All right, I have nothing more to add. Are you good with that, Greg? Okay, then. So I guess the next item is the Patriots holiday thrown on the agenda. Or is this a recommendation to try to do the holiday another day in our life?
I think this is just some food for thought. I don't have any guidance from any of the personnel associations yet, although I imagine something will come out at some point. So a couple of things are going to come up this year. One of the things is the fact, so we have the Patriots holiday in April, but the governor has said already that they're going to make some version of a holiday later in the fall so that it's essentially marathon day. Well, most of our personnel bylaws and most of our contracts allow for X number of holidays. Usually it's around 13. And that's not one of the included holidays. So it's something we would have to address for many personnel. That's not an issue because we already pay them to work or we don't have to pay for coverage if they're not working that day. It becomes more of an issue relative to overtime and paid days when you're looking at the unions that are involved, which is DPW and police at this time. So that's something we're going to have to think about and think about going into next year with the budget as well. The other thing that we need to start giving some food for thought is the fact that quite a few people are likely to have additional vacation personal days that they haven't utilized because they're currently working or they're essential and they're not utilizing at this time because they're just balancing it out. If you're sending people home to work from home right now, there's no way to manage 100% of, how many of those hours were you actively answering the phone and how many of those hours were you doing something else. That being the case, people aren't using that paid time and we're going to get to the end of the fiscal year and people are going to have a lot of remaining paid time. So it's something to consider of what to do with. Some communities are taking different approaches. Some communities are, amending their personnel rules just for this one time to allow carry over into next fiscal year. Some are paying out a portion of it. Some are starting to say that employees who are not coming in every day, so they're not the police, fire, DPW, that folks who are working it all from home need to start keeping track of time that they're actively working and time that they're not actively working. At this point, all municipalities in the area seem to be on the same page that they're paying folks one way or the other. Hopefully working more towards encouraging them to be doing something, whether it's training, whether it's phones, whether it's email, whether it's projects. But communities are starting to ask people to start to keep track of those numbers, whether it's something that we can get reimbursed for through the federal government, through the MEMA grant, or whether it's just something at some point we start looking at. One of the scary things is that some of the communities are actually starting to look at furloughs and laying people off because of how long can you go without having folks do some certain functions. So it's not something I'm suggesting, not even something I'm thinking that we need to start talking about right now. I think currently we're okay with all of our numbers, but it is something that we're going to want to keep in the back of our heads as this thing keeps developing.
Gotcha. I would suggest right now, at least from my perspective, I would not make any motion, or I would not necessarily support a motion of moving Patriots Day. Patriots Day is already set, and it's what, 2 weeks away now? And to get any union agreement on changes to unions that already identify that as a Patriots Day, I don't think timing would allow it to work very well. And secondly, those unions are essential. They're working anyway, so they're getting paid for the holiday plus their straight time, overtime, however that all compounds out. So I wouldn't necessarily look at it more as moving Patriots Day, but it could be something late this summer, or even next year when that new marathon day comes up in the fall. We could determine if we just want to give an extra paid day. You know, in other words, I don't see it as a switch one for the other, because I just don't see that working out. And it doesn't help the FY20 budget versus the FY21 budget. They're just different budgets. So I'll listen to you, Greg, also, and anybody else, what your thoughts are, Greg, on it.
Low on the radar right now. Really not worried about it either way.
Gotcha. You, Dylan?
Yeah, I feel similarly, not too worried about that.
Gotcha.
And as far as people's vacation times and things, I don't even want to get into worrying about that right now. I think we've been really good. We send people home, we pay them. We sent them home, they're getting paid. That's as it should be. We've already said if people get sick, we expect them to stay home and not use sick time. We're going to pay them if they get COVID. I think we're being fair with people. I don't think we're going to have a lot of issues, and I don't think we'll have too many cases, and we can deal with them as they come up individually if people have a run over on their hours at the end of the year for vacation. But once again, we still don't know how long this will last or how it's really going to play out. So I don't see any need to take any action. It's good to have it. Glad Heather brought it up, have it in our thoughts, but nothing. I don't think we need to move in any of this now.
Gotcha. All right, I guess we can get into some of the more administrative stuff. Personnel and committees, next agenda item would be more some of the wage authorizations that have been presented. Let me double check. We have 3 step increases and 1 position change. I guess I would start with what in the world?
John Donofrio.
I'm trying to get used to this whole view option. Things just automatically move on me and I'm not seeing it coming. So first one is a step increase for John Donofrio, if I read his name correctly. The fire department, he's going from an FD2 step 2 to an FD2 step 3. Do I have a motion?
I'll abstain, of course.
All right, Greg's going to stay out of that.
Yeah. I'd like to make a motion that we approve the step increase for John Donofrio, from step 2 to a step 3.
I second that. Call for a vote. Matt Urban, yes.
Dylan Clark, yes.
Sullivan abstain.
Next is again another fire department representative here. This is Janine Pimentel, going from a CL-3 step 7 to a CL-3-3 step 8. Do I have a motion?
Yeah, I would like to make the motion that we approve the step increase for Janine Pimentel from a CL3 step 7 to a CL3 step 8.
Okay, call for a vote. Matt Urban, yes.
Dylan Clark, yes.
O'Sullivan abstain.
Okay, we have a recommended step increase for Kayla Phillips with the library. She's going from a library assistant CL-1 step minimum to library assistant CL-1 step 1. Do I have a motion?
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion that we approve the step increase for Kayla Phillips from a CL1 step minimum to a CL1 step 1.
Second.
Call for vote.
Craig O'Sullivan, yes.
Matt Urban, yes.
Dylan Clark, yes.
Point of order, Matt, did you officially second Janine Pimentel's step increase? I didn't hear that called as a second before you voted it.
You may be correct. I may not have.
So you might want to run that again.
Revisit that, or do I just need to kind of?
I just revisit it quick just to make sure.
Okay.
So
Right.
Dylan made a motion.
Yes.
Janine's
Dylan
increase.
made the motion to approve Janine Pimentel's step increase from step 7 to step 8. I second that. I call for a vote. Matt Urban, yes.
Dylan Clark, yes.
O'Sullivan abstain.
Thank you, Greg.
Just before it comes back at us next week, you know?
It
Good
does.
catch. Good catch.
Oh, so, okay, now we have a Richard Wheeler from the fire department with a position change. He is moved from an FD2 step 4 on-call fire department member to a FD4 captain on call. We have a motion.
Sure, I'd like to make a motion that we approve of the position change and step increase. No, just position change for Richard Wheeler from FD2 step 4 to captain FD4.
I second that. Call for a vote. Matt Urban, yes.
Dylan Clark, yes.
O'Sullivan abstain.
Okay. Next item on personnel, I had been working with, and I had a comment. I don't recall other board members' comments on this, but we were reviewing the building commissioner's job description and comparing it to the advertisement. And the job description didn't necessarily call out regional roles, but the job description did. I mean, the advertisement did. So I believe Heather in this email had revised the first paragraph to incorporate the regional position. Have the other board members had a chance to review?
Yes.
Dylan,
Yes. Yep.
do you guys have any comments on this?
No comments at this time.
Do we have a motion to accept the revised first paragraph of the job description?
I move we accept the first paragraph as revised.
I second that.
Any further discussion? Call for vote.
O'Sullivan, yes.
Clark, yes.
Matt Urban, yes. So Heather, I would, I guess I can give you the floor if you have any updates you want to present for either the Henry Woods projects or Gaston Pond Dam.
Sure. So on Gaston Pond Dam, I actually had the opportunity to speak with our attorney, Jim Bard, this past week. He is still working on the letter. He's been going through the research of the entire binder of materials that we've put together over the past 15 or so years. So he's looking at those and going through some of the deeds to draft that. So hopefully we'll have a draft of that pretty soon. Henry Woods building, I have no current updates. Right now, no one's been in the building too much. We've been trying to keep an eye as closely as we can on the heating system to see where everything is. We still need to get in there to be able to order some auto bleeders, which I believe we'll probably do at this point over the summer months when we're not using the heating system, so they're easier to install. Greg's shaking his head, so I think that means he agrees with that plan. Yes. And then we'll go from there. At some point, we're going to need to figure out what's going on with our heating system and probably have someone come in and take a look at the whole thing to see where it's causing issues. One of the things we had happen a couple weeks ago was the power had flickered. Maybe it was last week. The power had flickered, and we actually had to go down and reset, do a hard reset of the digital controls. Because when we had lost power, it was a problem. So we had actually asked Travis, who is the consultant gentleman from I forget the name of the company, I Am Power, I believe it is, that he's been helping us out with some of the things, to the cost for him to purchase what's called the UPS, which is an uninterrupted power supply, and to install it was, I think, just under $600. So I was going to wait and see where our budget's coming out at relative to the Henry Woods building cost right now to see if it's something that we would be able to consider. He thinks it will help, though, with the idea of every time we lose power, the things flicker, which I think we have some power interruptions that happen rather more frequent than not at the Henry Woods building. So that will keep it so that everything still stays online and someone doesn't have to hard reset it every time. So that's all I have.
Most low voltage things like that, the computer side of it, when I did alarms for years, we always had continuous power supplies and surge suppressor systems set up into it to avoid the spikes. So that's what I was going to recommend anyway, so I'm glad that that's what he wants to do. We need some sort of surge suppressor and constant power supply, which assures we don't get any spikes or breaks. And that should stop from, messing with the computers.
It's the first step anyway.
It'll go a long way. You'd be surprised. Voltage spikes and stuff really, really mess with that.
So, other than that, we also have 3 meeting minutes. Has the board had a chance to review those meeting minutes?
Yes.
Yes, I have.
Do we have any discussion, or are we okay to start with motions on approving?
I'm okay with them.
Okay, I'll make a motion to accept the March 2nd, 2020 meeting minutes.
Second.
Any further discussion? Call for vote. Matt Urban,
Sullivan,
yes.
Sullivan, yes.
Clark, yes.
I'll make a motion to accept the March 16th, 2020 meeting minutes.
Second.
Any further discussion? Call for a vote.
O'Sullivan, yes.
Clark, yes.
Matt Urban, yes. Make a motion to accept the meeting minutes for March 30th,
Second.
2020.
Second that.
Any further discussion? Call for a vote.
O'Sullivan,
Clark, yes.
O'Sullivan, abstain.
Matt Urban, yes.
Dylan Clark, yes.
Thank you. We do have correspondence that has been received by the board regarding, I'll just read out the titles of each item. Charter Communication Free Access, East Quabbin Land Trust. There was a letter regarding putting in parking near their property off Flaherty, up off Christian Hill near, I forget what it is, the Prince River area.
Flaherty Road off the old reservoir up there.
Yeah. That's also been moved forward to the Conservation Commission to review that potential impact. Monty Tech FY21 preliminary budget was received. National Grid submitted a letter. Teamsters local union submitted a letter saying, don't mess with our contract during COVID, which nobody had planned on doing anyway. Monty Tech dinner was canceled, and Charter Communication upcoming charges, a letter regarding that was also presented. Anybody have any one of those correspondence you would rather discuss right now, or just leave it for the record and people can make requests through the town administrator's office?
I have no comments on those items of correspondence.
Yeah, nor do I. I think the parking area sounds like a nice idea, but that's really just something they need to notify us of. So I don't think it's really something we vote to approve. If I was reading their correspondence correctly, that followed that. As far as the budget for this, for Money Tech, that's really, we'll see what finance does with it. And we don't know how this stuff's going to play out yet. So it's nice that they have it and they have it early, but nothing else I think we need to work on tonight.
I agree. So I'll just put it out there right now. I'll go through everybody, all the panelists. Start with you, Greg, to see if there's anything else you would like to add, either from as a selectman report or just a topic you'd like to make sure is something we continue to follow up on or pay attention to.
I just reiterate to people, I don't watch much TV. I ditch my cable service. I do occasionally go on the internet and watch some newscasts. Very disheartening to see what they do in the news. It seems to me they're trying to instill panic and hysteria into people. And, there's really no numbers that are supporting some of the extreme panics they're causing right now. Clearly people are getting sick. Clearly this is going around. Clearly people that are more elderly are succumbing to this. So there's reasons to follow the social distancing, try to keep this brief, but not panic. There's a big difference between saying we need to take action and panic about it. And really, believe me, with the fire department, I've gone on a few calls. The ambulance goes all the time. The police going all the time. We interact with many people very safely. We don't have any members of the department that have tested positive. Many have come into contact with multiple individuals through transports and through other things. We do have a handful in town. Nothing that's a public risk, really. It's isolated homes here and there, random. There's no great panic for anybody. We don't have, some huge outbreak. It's not airborne. It's not something that, you walk too close to someone, they breathe on you, you've got it. People need to really practice. The mask will help make sure they're not spreading things. It will reduce the risk of inhaling something if somebody did sneeze or cough around you. But keep your hands clean and just be aware. We all touch our faces all the time. That's the worst thing we could do. Typically at a meeting, I would often sit with my hand on my chin, which other than me eating my chips here that I've cleaned before I started, I'm changing my habits and trying not to touch my face on a regular basis, and I don't lean on my face much. And you just got to be aware of what you do, and we can stay safe, and people need to, feel comfortable in their homes and feel comfortable in what they do, and just not panic. It's not like something's waiting outside the house to attack somebody. Be reasonable, be rational, and people are going to be okay.
I agree with that. It's a difficult balance a lot of people are doing based on what they're hearing, and kind of like you said, the anxiety that builds up through how some of it's presented. It's, again, kind of what you're saying is it's not don't pay attention and don't try to be safe. It's just don't let it get to you the point of panic and kind of overdo that fear. So I definitely understand what you're saying there.
The example I related you guys in an email. If you saw a structure on fire and you went inside that structure to take a temperature reading, you could see temperatures any place from as low as 400 up to 1,000 degrees inside there. Obviously, if you go in and take a breath of air, you'll die. It's a lethal environment by all means. But it's an environment that people go into with the proper equipment and the proper training and work for hours. It's how you prepare for it and how you handle yourself in it. It's just, you can make yourself safe in any environment, literally. I mean, biohazard suits are people in extreme environments. So the things the CDC tells us to do are very, very minuscule. We're not saying you need a biohazard suit in an SCBA and an air supply or a HEPA filter. They're just saying, wear a mask, wash your hands, and keep 6 feet from people. That's pretty simple. That there's not a lot of risk. It's not like, you don't do those things and you die. You don't do those things and you increase your risk of getting the virus, which has some pretty nasty side effects and is leading to a lot of death in the elderly, unfortunately. But they're pretty simple things to do.
Yeah, I agree. Dylan, what's your thoughts? Or do you have anything you want to add to the meeting before we start closing it up?
Yeah, actually, I should have maybe mentioned this when we were on the COVID topic earlier, but since this is a selectman report, we can do a little free form. I have had a few people mention that they're working on sewing homemade masks and things like that, and have been just looking for places to send them. And I was just wondering if we should maybe think about creating a way for people who are either looking for or looking to donate PPE, maybe through the administrator's office. I don't know if that's something that we could maybe do a quick post about, because I know there's a lot of people who are willing to and already have been putting in the time and effort to make a bunch of masks. So I know they're looking for stuff like that at Haywood Hospital, at Athol Hospital, and certainly any number of people in any number of capacities might be looking for masks as well. So I'm just putting that out there. Maybe it's something we could think about, and maybe quick post about it, or have a clearinghouse of some sort set up.
I gotcha. I had somebody had approached me before on that, and I did do a little initial kind of reach out to the fire chief, the police chief, trying to figure out the best way we could receive it, and then make sure it is safe, and then figure out who we would give it to. And obviously, once you bring the town into it, who we give it to isn't nearly as arbitrary as we'd like it to be due to all the laws about who gets what and who's giving it to who. It got a little complex, other than, is there some centralized state depository you can send it to who would then redistribute it? And that wasn't easy. One of the things that was a potential is, this is only like, how would we receive it? Not even what we would do with it, unless it's something we would want to use, say, kind of with Greg's recommendation. Is this something we'd feel comfortable if we received these things, we would hold on to it for election or town meeting time to offer to people participating in that? And if that's the case, it's something we could still continue. I think one of the things we thought might be possible is they could be received at the public safety building, because it's actually the only building consistently manned right now outside of the fire department and the EMS, and that's only as long as they're not on a call. But the idea was during certain hours of the daytime, not 24/7, you could call ahead and they could set a drop off where you say, I will be dropping something off at the door. Somebody drops off a bag of it. And then when you leave, they could pick it up and then possibly do a check and then store it in the garage or something. And then once that's accumulated, we could potentially use it for one of our own public gatherings that might be occurring in June or late May based on election dates. But But this is me just guessing right now. I never could get to that level because once the discussion started with where would we use it or how could we confirm whether it's safe, we kind of reached an impasse of we don't have the means and methods to say we receive this and it's safe to give to someone else to use because we don't know where it came from.
Exactly.
So
There is still a finite time that the virus is living on the surface, and they haven't really come up with that number of days yet. But if we did receive things like that and they sat off for a week or two or something, that should be enough time to say the virus will be dead if it was on it. People can certainly have the virus, not develop symptoms, and still, sneeze in their hands and they're making masks and be putting the virus in the masks. So you need to be careful for us taking and handing them to anybody. And you need to check with the CDC or the fire chief for recommendation for how long that these should sit someplace to be safe to be handed out. But I think the idea of having them available maybe for people at election is a great idea. If not, I don't know if we'll be able to get regular paper masks for people for election. The fire chief has gotten some masks in. But, we got to put one on every patient now. They have to have a mask on before they go to the hospital. People transporting wearing masks. If there's no signs, they can reuse the same mask, that same individual. If there's signs, they have to throw it away. So we're going to go through them fast. Whether for us, a homemade mask wouldn't be applicable. It's going to be an N95 probably for most of the guys in the ambulance. The better medical quality one, it might have some, it's probably got, I don't know for sure, some sort of antibacterial coating on it or something, as well as being a finer mesh and a better fit. But I think for election purposes, like I said, the concern is more people breathing out. If people donate and we can make them available, that'd be great.
So I'll try to reach out to the police chief again on that to see if he's comfortable. Well, not just the police chief. I'll reach out to the emergency management team and just see if that's something that they have the manpower and the ability to actually move forward with something like that. And if they can, I'll ask Heather to kind of come back and give the board an update and then maybe work with advertising it so people know what they can do with Mass Safe Created. Otherwise, right now, if we don't get to that in a timely fashion and people in town have made them, I would recommend start reaching out to some of the other, like even asking the hospital directly, asking some of the other state offices, because I do think they're starting to set up places for these homemade masks where you can donate it if we don't have an in-town option set up yet.
It might be a good idea to see if the chiefs, plural, are willing to receive them and possibly give them to people who ask for them, just a voluntary basis. If it's known that they have them and people want one, they can ask that a cruiser or a squad car drop it off.
Yep. So
That's a good idea.
So we'll see what we can do. I'll bring it back up. I know that originally it was just too much at the time for all of us to discuss and try to create a plan we thought would could be useful. But this sounds like something that we might be able to take use of, make use of, I guess. One last thing, and I think it was a good point that Greg, you kind of brought up a point of order issue earlier, and I think that I missed another item regarding the emergency management's recommendations on use of parks and things like that. We didn't officially have a vote, so even if it's a vote of support. So I would make a motion to accept the recommendation to prohibit basketball games,
And post the parks for
post the parks,
social distancing.
for social distancing and no gatherings over 10 people.
I'd second that motion.
Any further discussion? All right, I'll call for a vote.
Sullivan, yes.
Clark, yes.
Matt Urban, yes. And one last thing, we'll just give it one last shot. We have, again, the attendee with the phone number 2842. Just want to make sure if you're interested, you have a chance to provide any input on any item that came up tonight. Your phone is unmuted, so if you choose, you can speak.
Hello,
Hello.
this is 2842. This is Sam Lipson.
Hello, Sam.
I decided to listen in late. Thank you very much. I thought it was a great meeting, very well organized. I do have, I did comment a couple of weeks ago before the last meeting, which was a very prompt meeting of an issue occurring on 86 West Street, and I brought it to your attention, and I didn't know if anything was done in regard to our discussion regarding the condition of the property and the fact that it's being sold or trying to be sold, and I think someone of authority, the fire department, the Board of Health, the building inspector, someone needs to enter that property to examine. There's a significant amount of black mold in that property, and I know it's private. However, I think that the town has some sort of an obligation to pay attention to what kind of remediation gets done, or whether the remediation doesn't get done, and then ultimately the property is sold to someone who's unaware of this, and they happen to be placed in a very uncomfortable positions by living in a place that has been infested by black mold. So I know, Matt, you and I had conversation in that regard, and I did send a letter to the town through the town administrator in that regard, and I was just wondering what the status was.
Personally, I do not have an update at this time. I do understand that there are certain steps involved where any number of the, whether it's the Board of Health, the fire department, or the building department, naturally have a role in entering and having an inspection of that property, depending on what's going on with the property. So there is kind of a spot where they will have a voice when the time is right, either at a point of transaction, or if somebody happens to notice a dumpster and people are trying to throw sheetrock out the window, a permit should have been called for to include a dumpster permit. But I would like to see if Heather's had a chance to follow up or get any more information on that.
Sure. Thanks, Matt. So Sam, I have not had an opportunity to send you another email with an update. I was still waiting on a couple departments. My brief understanding after discussing this quickly with a couple of the departments is the fire department is aware and they've been on site. And Brianna was working on this when she was still with us, but I haven't got a full update from everybody on this. When I collect all of the information on what I know, I will get back to you, hopefully in the next couple of days.
Thank you very much. As long as it doesn't slip by this town and someone ultimately purchases it and finds out that the town didn't do their due diligence when the building permit was taken out, or when a dumpster permit was taken out, or whether it even gets taken out. I don't know this, but I've known that property for 40 years, and it's been foreclosed on numerous times. It's had numerous owners, and I believe the bank owns it now. And I just didn't want someone, I didn't want someone not to be appraised of the condition of it before a building permit was taken out.
I appreciate it, you bringing it to our attention, Sam.
Thank you. And this is a wonderful meeting. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. I appreciate you participating remotely.
And you guys are all doing a wonderful job as a town, and trying to be safe, and also trying to make sure that the town is run smoothly. And I wish more people would listen, because a lot of people talk, but they don't take the time to listen. Because you probably notice how many people have sent their phone numbers in. Probably very few.
We're getting there. Yes, Greg?
I was going to say that I had a conversation with Sam about a week and a half ago. I didn't know if Sam wanted me to bring that up now in regards to the blog.
In regards to what?
Having a blog established where people can have an open forum.
Oh, yes. Neil Anders is really the point person on that. And he sent me some information. And as I understood it from being at a meeting, the selectmen thought it was a good idea, but the previous town administrator, for some reason, thought there was some uncomfortable liability issues in that regard, and that's as far as it's gone. So if you need to follow through on that, you'll have to discuss it with Neil Anders, and he's been doing some research, and I think he'd probably be a good person to discuss that with. I'm just supporting the direction, although I'm not as computer literate as perhaps Neil is, so I don't know all the intricacies, but I am supporting that direction. Thank you.
Okay. What I told Sam was that my impression from the meeting was Neil was interested in establishing some sort of blog, and a quick conversation with Neil, and I have to call him back. I haven't got a chance yet. He said that he wouldn't do it himself. He doesn't have that type of experience. I was under the impression that Neil would be wanting to set this blog up, but he had somebody in mind to do it. And I need to talk with him further to find out where that was coming from, because with a brief conversation with him, he doesn't sound like he was ready to move forward with it, or was moving forward in a direction with it with any particular group or person. Sam came to me and wanted to know who was doing it, and had offered to contribute with funding for that, if that was the case.
Yeah, that's correct.
But I haven't gotten back with Neil yet, and I just want to let you guys know what's going on with it. Obviously, it's something we decided as a board that we can't endorse as a board, because we can't control what's on the forums. We can't be involved in it, really. But I assured Sam, and I want to make sure with you guys that this is the case, that we all like the idea of some sort of public forum where people can talk about things and interact. We just didn't want it to be through our website. Is that correct?
I agree with that. I also think it's, if you put a blog out there and create certain topics where there is an expectation that someone's reading all those comments and trying to filter through it and bring it to the board's attention, you know, these are some of the things people are saying about this topic. And, you know, at this time, we probably can find an employee that has that time to review all those thoughts and comments. But once we get back to regular work, I think that would be much harder to find someone that has the time to stay on top of. I think we've all seen how sometimes certain Facebook, you go from 5 comments, all of a sudden you got 300 comments. And only 100 of those are not just swear words at each other. But you still got to filter through it. And so that it does make it hard if you don't have enough money to have the manpower where you really just have a public relations department that manages that or something. I think it is hard to do it the right way.
That's why I think we need to stay distance from it. But I like the idea of some sort of community blog. Not that we have to follow it, but certainly people can feel free to bring it to our attention when it's going on in the community. We can look at it when we feel like looking at it. But I don't think it's something we can be tied to. As much as I think it's a great idea, I think we need to draw a hard line that we can't be involved in it. But I think it's a great idea for the community if people want to get it going and participate in that type of dialogue. I think it's a great thing for the town of Barre and the community, surrounding communities as well.
I agree.
It can be a great source for, sale items, farm goods, things that people make themselves as selling, functions and activities going on, and people at their, Boy Scout things or their church functions. It could grow to a much bigger audience in all the local communities if a blog like this existed. People looking for help with the yard work, and then you get a high school kid looking to do something, he can pick up some yard work in some places. And it's just it's a great avenue. I've seen it done in other towns. It's just a matter of it's something that I don't think can really be run through us without changing what it is. And the intent of it being an open forum blog, it really needs to stay out of the government hands, and therefore out of our control and out of our jurisdiction.
Yeah, I agree with that. You have anything to add, Dylan?
Oh, I agree with that too. I like the idea. It sounds like a lot of work for someone to be moderating a forum like that. Of course, it's tempting with these functions exist elsewhere, and it's tempting to try to lump them all together. So you're not going to Craigslist, Facebook, and a number of other sites. But it sounds like a project for not the town of Barre to undergo itself.
I'm willing to. I mean, if people want to send me emails that have ideas or interest in it, I'm going to have another conversation with Neil, and I'll keep talking with Sam, and I'd be willing to facilitate between people that want to get it going, to try to help get them in touch with one another. They can go through me to do that, and hopefully we can get people that have interest. And between someone's going to know how to set it up, someone's going to be willing to run it, put the time into it. Sam's graciously offered to help funding for it, whatever there may be involved. I think it's a great idea, and I'd be willing to put some time in as far as that goes to help people, as far as just being a facilitator, to put people together and help them organize. But it won't be as a board member, and it won't be as a town. It'd be just as myself. I will put that out there. And they can contact me through the town email, because I'd rather not with my personal email on here. So.
Yep. Well, I think that does it for the agenda items. Are we good? Do we have anything more? Are we ready to make a motion to adjourn for the evening?
I'm ready.
We have a motion?
Yeah, I'd like to move that we adjourn this evening's meeting.
I'll second.
I'll call for a vote.
O'Sullivan, yes.
Clark, yes.
Matt Urban, yes.
Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
In 2 weeks, we're doing